Welcome back into another edition of the BrownZone.com Zone Coverage Podcast. I'm Andy Barch with AM 930 WEOL and 100.3 FM. As always, joined by Scott Petrak, Browns beat reporter with the Chronicle, Telegram, the Medina Gazette, and of course at BrownZone.com. Scott, we're into training camp and things are way, way different this year, and, well, we're not all that far off from the scheduled start of the season either, so things are really heating up.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that, Bull, and we've talked about it. It seems like it keeps getting farther and farther away. You know, the goalposts kind of move, but I do feel like we can start talking about football. Doesn't mean that we'll guarantee a complete season, but I feel good that on August 14th, which is about a week from now, I'll be in Berea watching training camp practice. And, you know, I think over the last 4 or 5 months, there was no guarantee that we'd be doing that.
Lots of ground to cover today. Major takeaways from yesterday's Zoom call. J.C. Tretter and Austin Hooper spoke. We'll also get into the loss of Andrew Billings, how big you think that might be, the David Njoku situation, what's going on with Odell Beckham Jr., and much, much more. So, again, lots of ground to cover on today's episode. Let's begin, though, with your major takeaways from yesterday's Zoom call. J.C. Tretter and Austin Hooper both spoke, and it sounds like there was a ton of ground to cover in that conversation.
There was, and we can start with J.C. Tretter just because, as the NFLPA president, I think the whole league and the whole country is kind of hanging on every word that J.C. has to say. So, you know, the first question I asked him was, are you going to opt out? He's got his new wife. You know, he's married in, I think, February. She's pregnant. So, you know, there's a lot of players that are worried about that. But he said he's thought about it. He's going to play. He will not opt out. But I thought it was interesting. He said he's living in the team hotel for now. He wants to see how everybody, all the players back in Berea, how that goes. Are there any outbreaks before he decides to move back home with his pregnant wife? He also stressed, and this was all JC, and he brought it up a couple times, and finally I followed up, like, are you actually saying this? And, you know, the way the NFL and the NFLPA, their agreement is it'll be daily testing for the first 2 weeks. And then I think it's 5%. If the positive tests are under 5%, then it becomes every other day. And JC said, hey, we need to go testing every day, and we need to continue testing every day. And he pointed to Major League Baseball, and they test every other day. And you saw what happened with the Miami Marlins, and you saw what happened with the St. Louis Cardinals, is even that extra lag, as JC called it, between testing days, and then by the time you get the results back, that's how an outbreak can happen. So he feels like if the league tests every day, there's really a much better chance to contain it and limit any outbreaks. Now, that probably means the union will need to go back to the league to get that changed, and maybe the union has to give up something. You know, whatever it is, it's always a negotiation because it'll be more expensive to test every day. But JC was adamant about that, and he thinks that's really important. And just a final point on that, you know, there's been it looks like some false positives. Browns number 3 quarterback Garrett Gilbert. I think he tested 9 or 10 times. One came back positive. He got put on the COVID list and then taken off 2 days later after a couple more negative tests. So you would assume that's a false positive, right? You don't have coronavirus for 1 day. And the same thing happened to Matthew Stafford in Detroit, and Matthew Stafford's wife made a big deal about it. Says she was kind of ostracized in public. You know, they didn't want her to come into to pick up carry-out food. They said, no, we'll bring it to you, kind of thing. And JC's point is, if we're testing every day, then those things will be resolved quickly. And it's kind of better safe than sorry. Hey, if these guys have to go in protocol for 2 days, we're better off putting them, you know, kind of quarantining them for a couple of days as opposed to worrying about the false positives. Those will take care of themselves. So I thought it really was a newsworthy conversation with JC, kind of like they always are with him, because he's an Ivy League grad and one of the best thinkers on the team.
And talking about Austin Hooper, too, it seems like Austin Hooper has gotten pretty comfortable, although he did say, you know, he doesn't really know what to expect or how long it's going to take for him to develop any kind of chemistry with this new group he's working with, too. So it seemed like he had quite a bit to go over as well. Yeah,
and I should say, Austin Hooper kind of echoed JC. Austin talked first, but they echoed each other in that they feel comfortable inside the Browns facility. They think JC, who is, he's protecting the players' safety, right? That's his number one focus as union president. So I don't think he'd say this if he didn't mean it. He said, I look around and he goes, I don't see one thing I would say the Browns should do differently to give us the best chance to stay, safe. As far as, we talked about the locker room, instead of 90, it's only 40, and then the rest of the guys in the weight room. The weight room's in the field house. The number of times you get your temperature checked, and just the way the building's set up, the meeting rooms, and there's partitions in the meeting rooms, so, you can't spread the virus. And Austin Hooper said the same thing. He said, I don't know if you can feel 100% confident, but I feel comfortable in the building. But then he talked about with Baker. And Austin Hooper said he talked to Baker even before he signed with the Browns. And he said, I hope I'm not getting anybody in trouble, meaning before free agency, guys know which teams are interested, right? Agents have conversations, it's kind of hush-hush, but which teams have salary cap room, which teams have needs at your position, which is tight end. So he knew the Browns would be interested, and he talked to Baker ahead of time because he wanted to get a feel for who his quarterback could be. And then once he signed, he talked to Baker and said, hey, I'd like to come down and be with you. So he stayed with Baker for a couple of weeks. It was 2 different trips. They threw together. They worked out together. He stayed with Baker and his wife. So they were able to build some chemistry, and Austin Hooper said it was really important to bank some reps. He said, we banked a couple hundred reps, and he kept pointing out that in this unique NFL season, where there's no off-season program in person, right? We're not going to have any preseason games. The Browns are only going to practice in pads from August 17th through the opener September 13th, right? So I think you're looking at 14 padded practices in the 3 weeks of training camp and then another 1 in that first week of the regular season. So everything's limited. Everything's condensed. And he thinks it's extremely valuable to have those reps with Baker, even though they were in, March, April, May. So I thought that was a good takeaway. And he said Baker's his type of quarterback. Big arm, a lot of swag. What we've come to know from Baker, but that's what Austin Hooper wants. He wants his quarterback to have some swag, and he likes the big arm. But it wasn't all roses with Hooper. And he said, hey, as a team, we're trying to build continuity. That's the number one thing we need to accomplish before the season. Because I don't know exactly how we're going to do that given the condensed situation, right? Like we talked about, no preseason, limited practices. He goes, we're doing all we can. We had a great virtual offseason, but it's going to be difficult. New system, new coach, all the things we've talked about, Bull. He kind of reinforced that. He said it's not going to be easy, right? The Browns do have challenges to overcome. And he said the same for building relationships outside of Baker, right? He's got one with Baker from the offseason. But with the other guys on the team, you're not lining up. They haven't practiced yet. They're not going to practice for another week. So, yeah, they go through walkthroughs, but they're not the same. They're still doing virtual meetings. So they're not spending a lot of time around each other. And he said normally we'd go to restaurants for dinner. We'd go have a couple of beers. We're not doing that now. And the only way to overcome that and to build that chemistry that's necessary is to spend time together in the building then, but even that's not allowed yet. Now, maybe as we get into this and more negative tests come back, players will spend more time around each other in the building, but they're still going to be socially distanced. They'll still be wearing masks. So that's just one of the, I think, realities of the situation is the locker room might not be as tight. I think it won't be as tight as it would have been in a normal year.
You mentioned a few moments ago that there are a lot of challenges ahead, and one of the challenges that the Browns are dealing with right now, the players that have decided to opt out, and I think the biggest name on that list you could argue right now would be Andrew Billings. He was part of a group that was pretty talented and somewhat deep, but with him being gone, opting out, that kind of takes a little bit of that depth away. How big of a loss do you think that will be?
I think it's significant, Bull. We all remember how last season finished. Well, maybe we don't because the world has flipped upside down since then, but last season ended with the Browns decimated across that front four. Olivier Vernon had a knee injury and missed, I think it was 6 out of the last 8 games. And he was a shell of himself when he did play. Myles Garrett, we know he was suspended for 6 games, for the last 6 games. Larry Njoku was suspended for 1 of those. You're looking at 3 of your top 4 guys. Sheldon Richardson was the lone last man standing, and he was kind of shifting between end and tackle. He took on leadership roles, which he's not which hadn't kind of been his thing to do. So I think Andrew Berry, even though he was with the Eagles last year, recognized that and said, we need more depth across the front. So he went and signed Andrew Billings, who started, I think it was 29 games over the last 2 years with the Bengals. So he's a legitimate NFL player. He went and drafted Jordan Elliott in the 3rd round out of Missouri to play, and these are defensive tackles we're talking about. So you think, okay, I got my 4 defensive tackles set. We're going to have a strong rotation. Well, now probably number 3 on that list, Andrew Billings, and he might have competed for a starting spot with Larry Ogunjobi. Now he's gone. So now you're down to 2 guys, your same 2, Sheldon Richardson and Larry Ogunjobi, and then a rookie is now your number 3, who hasn't had the offseason, who won't have a preseason. So now you got to question that depth a little bit. Now Daniel Ukali, or I always butcher his name, it's kind of ukulele. He showed a little bit last year, especially in training camp, and then I think he got hurt and was kind of a non-factor. So there's reason to think, okay, he might be able to contribute. You got Eli Anku, who's kind of a journeyman in the league, but it's just not the same. And I think the Browns will miss Andrew Billings. And, the Browns are saying all the right things. They support the guys who opt out. It's a personal decision. They understand it, and so do I. I think it is up to each individual to make that decision, and I don't question any player for opting out in this situation. They're looking out for their health and their family's health. But it's a blow to the Browns. Now, the opt-out deadline is at 4 o'clock today. We're taping this on Thursday. So as of now, the Browns have 4 opt-outs, Andrew Billings, and then 3 young offensive linemen. The offensive linemen aren't a huge blow. I will say Drew Forbes and Colby Gossett were both going to compete for that starting right guard spot. So it had to be tough for them to opt out, given that they had a chance to compete for that starting job. Now it looks like it'll be Wyatt Teller is the huge favorite to keep the starting job he finished with last year, although, rookie Nick Harris could go there, maybe slide Chris Hubbard, used to play tackle, maybe give him a shot at starting guard. But if the Browns only have 4 opt-outs, that's not that bad when you look around the league and you see some huge names in New England. But there's no getting around that Billings is a loss. Now, I'm sure the team would say, hey, he could have gotten hurt the first day of training camp, and it's the same thing. And that's true, but we'd be talking about it the same way, that it is a loss, and they're going to have to find some other depth along that front to not be in the same situation they were a year ago.
And it just seems like things are awfully interesting on the offensive side of the ball, Scott. I know we've talked a lot about how there are some new personalities in that room, and you talked about the difficulty of not necessarily being able to be in the same room, and that could certainly have an effect on chemistry. We weren't quite sure what was going on with David Njoku. It sounded like he wanted out, and now it seems like he has really changed his tune. Scott, what do you think changed with David Njoku, and why do you think he's back on board again and not wanting to be traded?
Well, somebody asked me this in my mailbag this week, and I think it's a combination of things. And I noted that I just don't think the trade market was that big for David Njoku. I think he and Drew Rosenhaus said, hey, let's go see if we can go somewhere else. We're not going to be the starter after Austin Hooper was signed. There's more depth. They drafted Harrison Bryant. Let's go find a greener pasture. And number one, the Browns said, nah, we're not interested in trading. Now, if the market had been huge, the Browns probably would have said, okay, we'll trade him, right? For a 3rd-round pick, I think they would have gotten that deal done. I just don't think there was that market. Now, I had somebody on Twitter really object to that, and they think David Njoku is a valued guy in the league, and they, pointed to some analytics that show what kind of yards per target and missed defenders and those kinds of things. I have seen David Njoku for 3 years. And now last year was a lost year because he had the broken wrist, and then he was in Freddie Kitchens' doghouse, and he barely played. I just have not seen him come close to living up to his status as a number 29 pick, first round, number 29 pick in the 2017 draft. I haven't seen it, and that doesn't mean he can't live up to his potential, and he's still young, and he's still athletic. But I'm just not confident that he will fulfill that potential, which we've talked about. This is why I wasn't really that bent out of shape if he wanted to be traded. If the Browns moved him, I don't think it's a huge loss. I think the Browns feel better about David. They think him in that number 2 role behind Austin Hooper can have a big impact on this offense. And so when David came back, I think part of it is there wasn't a huge trade market. Then he comes back and reports because you can't hold out in today with the new CBA. It's just financially really difficult for the players. So he comes back, he reports to Berea. He's around some teammates. Now, it's not the same, but he sees teammates, right? He might be working out with them separately away from the building in that run-up to when they were allowed back in the building. He sat down, well, I don't know if he sat down, but he talked to Andrew Berry, whether it's on the phone or in person or Zoom. He talked to Andrew Berry, and Andrew Berry expressed the team's desire to keep him and the desire for him to, their belief that he will have a significant role. Maybe not, he's not going to be the starter because you paid Austin Hooper $10.5 million a year to be that guy. But the number 2 tight end in Kevin Stefanski's offense is important. So I think all these things played into David Njoku saying, you know what, I am comfortable in the Browns facility, in Berea, around these guys. Andrew Berry is a straightforward guy. He said they're going to use me. I'm going to rescind that trade request, and to quote his tweet, I'm all in. And I think that was the right move because if David Njoku decided to pout and continue to make this an issue, he could see himself out of the league relatively quickly, right? He would have to go somewhere else, have a huge impact immediately, and I think this is the best situation for him to kind of prove himself as a player.
Well, one more topic to get to here before we get to your golf shot of the week. And, this is something that I think the Browns pretty much stomped on the fire and put this thing out completely. But anytime you bring up the name Odell Beckham Jr., you know that you're going to have some people that come to his defense and other people are going to say he brings way too much drama to the table. Is he really worth it? And it seems as though the latest round of this has to do with some comments he made long before the Browns showed him how safe things were in Berea. Is it much ado about nothing, the comments that he made a couple of weeks ago, or is this something that I think the fans should look a little bit deeper into? At least on the surface, it seems like they've already put out that fire.
Yeah, well, luckily, we're going to have resolution today. Well, like I mentioned, opt-out is 4 o'clock. And if you don't opt out by then, you can't opt out unless you become high risk or somebody in your immediate family becomes high risk. So Odell has to make that decision at 4. And everybody we've talked to with the Browns says he's committed. He's been a full participant since he arrived. They don't expect him to opt out. So in that regard, it is a little bit much ado about nothing. However, Odell is such a complicated individual, and he has a complex personality. And he is, I think there's a level of deep thought to him, and he thinks about things, and he expresses himself, and sometimes it can be misconstrued. Sometimes he talks maybe without understanding the full repercussions of something he says, because if he says something, it's going to get huge attention. So when he talks about how he doubts whether the league will be able to play, and he doubts whether it's safe, and he thinks the league should wait, those are going to draw headlines because he's that kind of a personality. And I don't have an issue with any of those things. I think those are reasonable thoughts to have. Now, what's changed is, like you mentioned, he's been back in the facility. The NFL and NFLPA came to an agreement on return-to-work guidelines and protocols, which weren't in place when he did the roundtable with Victor Cruz and Cam Newton and Todd Gurley. And when he did the interview with Wall Street Journal, the interview was released Monday. He had done the interview in July, a couple of weeks before the agreement between the NFL and the NFLPA. So I think it's safe to say that he has changed his mind to some degree. There might still be a level of trepidation, and I completely get that, and I'm sure a lot of people in the league have. But it seems like with the agreement, with his return to Berea, he's, come to grips, and that might not be the right phrase, but he has resolved himself that, yes, it's safe to play. Yes, I want to play. And the other factor with Odell is even last year when he was dealing with that core muscle injury that required surgery, he kept saying that 2020 was going to be a huge year for him. And I think he still believes that. And the only way it's going to be a huge year is if he plays and he thinks he's healthy, and he thinks there's a chance for he and the Browns to have a lot of success this year. So it sure seems like he's going to go through with it and play and put kind of those doubts in the back of his mind.
There's doubt, I think, with not only the Browns but every team as to how this is all going to go down before the start of the season. But the good news for the Browns is that, as you mentioned a few moments ago, Scott, we are awfully close to seeing these guys get back out onto the field and start practicing. That is 1 week from Friday. You mentioned the date before, August the 14th, and I think we are all definitely looking forward to that. All right, Scott, we've come to that point in the show where we get to examine your golf shot or your golf shots of the week. Now, last weekend, Mother Nature did not play nice as she decided to rain on the golf parade on Saturday and on Sunday. Did you get a chance to do a whole lot of golfing last week?
Well, you know what, Bull? I'm glad I got one in Friday because I haven't played since, and it's killing me. I'm hoping to get out again tomorrow. Between the Browns schedule, where we're starting to have interviews, we mentioned Andrew Barry and J.C. Treader and Austin Hooper. We're going to talk to Coach Kevin Stefanski tomorrow on Friday. And with the really poor weather at the beginning of the week, it's been tough. But I did have a couple of shots, in my opinion, worth mentioning. Last Friday, went to my old tried and true Pleasant Valley. But we've only played together once. And about the only shot I remember from when we played in that scramble is I hit a big rescue club to this par 5. And it had some left to right bend in it. It was probably the best shot I hit that day. Well, I had a couple of noteworthy rescue clubs kind of out of trouble at Pleasant Valley last week. At number 11, that's kind of behind a tree, and it wasn't a crazy hard shot, but I was in the rough, and I had to hit a left-to-right shot from 200 yards with the rescue club, and I hit it about 18 feet and two-putted for par. And then on number 15, I pushed the drive a little bit. It's a dogleg right, and I tried to cut off too much of the corner, and I didn't catch it quite right. So I didn't clear all the trees, and I'm kind of behind this V-shaped tree, and then there's another tree. But there's an opening in the V, and I said to the guy I was playing with, I'm saying, I'm going to go through these. So he got up and got out of the cart because you never know, right? The ball could come flying back. And, and that's probably not a great swing thought to have when you're over the ball is, man, if this comes back and hits me in the face, my wife's going to be pissed at me, right? Because I don't need to hit this shot, right? I mean, I could chip out sideways, but being the idiot that I am, I thought, I can pull this off. And really, the tree was really close to me. It wasn't like I had to carry it 20 yards. It was about 5 feet in front of me. So all I had to do was start it in the right direction, but then I had to play a big cut with the rescue club. Anyway, it came off perfect. It went through the opening. It probably cut or sliced 40 yards in the air. It winds up cutting perfect and runs right by the hole to about 30 feet. The problem is I three-putted from there, but the shot was so cool, and I wound up not maiming myself that I thought it was worth bringing up.
Well done. So you were able to make that shot out of the V. And as far as I'm concerned, the V means victory or very good, however you want to break that down. But outstanding stuff. Now, I love the mentality there, too. I mean, you're thinking about what happens if I hit this thing off the tree and it comes back and it hits me in the face. My wife is going to be pissed. Hey, we've all been there before. We've all been there before. No question about that.
I know. Well, I think I told her about it after. It's safe to say afterward, right? Honey, I tried this dumbass shot.
Well, as long as everything turned out okay and you didn't get hurt in the whole ordeal, I think you're fine. So, yeah, you could mention it after the fact. There's no harm in that. No harm in that at all. Great stuff as always, Scott. Next week will be very interesting when we sit down and record another one of these because at that moment we will be awfully close or at least maybe on the brink of the first full day of practice, and I think we're all looking forward to that.
Yeah, it should be fun, but we'll do this right before practice starts, and we'll have plenty to talk about.
All right, that's Scott Petrak, Browns beat reporter with the Chronicle Telegram, the Medina Gazette, and, of course, at brownzone.com. That's going to wrap things up on today's edition of the brownzone.com Zone Coverage Podcast. For Scott Petrak, this is Andy Barch saying thank you again for tuning in. We'll talk to all of you again next week.